Hi everybody, welcome to the very first episode of Who's That in History. Today I'm going to be looking at somebody who is quite honestly overlooked in English history. Her name is Jaquetta of Luxemburg. So welcome, hope you enjoy the episodes and let's get cracking. Jaquetta of Luxemburg was born in 1415 in the Palace of Westminster in London. Her father was Peter of Luxemburg, Count of St. Pol. Most of Jaquetta's early life is not really recorded, documented. So what we know about her is very limited. But what we do know is that her uncle was actually head of the army who captured Joan of Arc and then eventually traded her to the English, who then obviously burnt her at the stake for witchcraft. On April the 22nd, 1433, Jaquetta was 17, and it was time she got married. She married John Lancaster, 1st Duke of Bedford. The Duke, her new husband, was the third son of King Henry IV of England. So that's quite high up there in, the whole, I'm more important than you. Anyway, Jaquetta's new husband was the third son of King Henry IV of England. So they were pretty high up on the social status within the kingdom. She was quite an important lady just because now of who she married. And at 17, that's quite a feat, quite a feat. Anyway, he died a few years later. They didn't have any children. And then Jaquetta had all of this money. She was still quite young. She had a duchess title to her name, and the crown allowed her to keep that title after her husband died. So she has money, she has title, and no husband. And she was quite young. So what's she gonna do? She knew that if she went to England to the court, that she would be made to marry someone else. And she was thinking by this time, you know what? Stuff this, I want to marry for love. Cue her next husband. Sir Richard Woodville was the late Duke's Chamberlain, and he was commissioned by Henry VI, King Henry VI, to bring Jaquetta to court. Except they fell in love and then got married in secret, which, was kind of really not the right thing to do. So when they got to court and the marriage came out, they were in a fair bit of trouble. But they just got a fine, which was about $1,000 in today's money, and everyone was happy again. Now, Jaquetta went on to have 14 children with Richard Woodville. 14. I have 2, and that is a lot of work. 1, before I had my second, was a lot of work. But 14 children. That is insane. Insanity. There are ways to not have that many children, even back in the day. They knew how children were made. So why didn't they just not? I don't know. 14 children that's a lot of children. My 2 are crazy. Can you imagine 14? Anyway, moving right along. So it was said that Jaquetta was descended from the goddess Melusina. Now, there are many stories in many different cultures of a goddess that is a half woman, half fish, and has all of these dreams and hopes and wishes to become human or mortal. And Jaquetta was said to be descended from Melusina, giving her magical powers. It is said that she could hear the song of Melusina when somebody close to her or in her family had died. It also apparently gave her the gift of foresight. Now this was actually quite well documented through all of the history works that you find on Jaquetta Woodville. So anyway, back to her marriage. So after they got married and it wasn't really accepted. They paid the fine. The king went, okay, sure, you guys can stay married. There's really not much I can do about it now. You were married in the eyes of the Lord, so I guess it's going to have to stick. So they paid the fine, and the king made Richard Woodville a baron, which for somebody who was a nobody, basically, to then become a baron. That made him a little bit higher on the social standing ladder. So enough so that he could marry Jaquetta, because she was a duchess, remember. A few years later, Jaquetta is called back to court after Henry VI married Margaret of Anjou. She is called back to court to become a lady-in-waiting. And she actually formed quite a strong friendship with Margaret of Anjou. By the mid-1440s, Jaquetta and her family were in quite a powerful position. Jaquetta was related to both the king and the queen, Margaret of Anjou, by marriage. She outranked all the ladies at court except for the queen. So this is when the War of the Roses really started. The Yorkist army crushed the Lancastrians. It was the Battle of Towton on the 29th of March, 1461. That was when Edward IV, the first York king, took the throne. Now, Jaquetta's oldest daughter, Elizabeth, had gotten married to a man named John Grey. Sadly, though, he was killed, and Elizabeth's mother-in-law refused to give Elizabeth's two sons their land that was their ancestral land from their father after his death. So she was destitute, she was penniless, and she went and lived with her mother and the rest of her siblings in, basically in disgrace. So she then wanted to meet the new king, King Edward. She hoped that she could plead with him to give her sons back their land, that they were owed. She thought that they were owed this land because it was their father's land, which, I agree. Their father dies, becomes their land. Easy, right? Well, anyway, so she went along and she tried to meet Edward. Things didn't really go to plan. I'm not saying that they went badly, quite the opposite. They actually went quite well. Elizabeth ended up marrying King Edward in secret. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, had other plans for King Edward. However, when he went to reveal this at a gathering at the castle, King Edward stood up and said, "I'm already married," which of course, was really a big problem for the Earl of Warwick. He had basically just spent a very long time negotiating with the French about this marriage, and to have King Edward go, "Nah, sorry mate, I'm already married," that was a problem. So Elizabeth then came to court and she was crowned. She was crowned queen on the 26th of May, 1465, thus beginning her reign. With Elizabeth now queen, the Woodvilles rose to very great power. With Elizabeth now on the throne as queen, Jaquetta and her husband Richard had to turn coat to York. For the longest time, they had been Lancastrian supporters because, Jaquetta's friendship with Margaret of Anjou and King Henry, they were Lancasters. But now they had a York king. So Jaquetta and her husband, Richard, had to support their daughter, who was now sitting on a York throne. Jaquetta's husband, Richard, he got a good job now. He was created Earl Rivers. In March 1466, Earl Rivers became Lord High Treasurer. Oh, that's fancy, huh? Jaquetta then found really rich and really powerful spouses for her plethora of children. So they married off they went. They were in really influential places all around the kingdom with lots of money, lots of land, and she just had lots of power. Lots of power. But of course, when somebody gets lots of power, somebody else doesn't like it. So the Yorkists were getting their, knickers in a twist because the Woodvilles had so much influence over the kingdom and to be frank, over the king. In 1469, the Earl of Warwick openly went against King Edward and he captured two of the Woodville men. Earl Rivers and his son John were captured and put to death without trial. Not long after her husband and son were executed, Jaquetta was accused by Thomas Wake, who was a follower of Warwick, of witchcraft. This was around the time that Warwick actually overthrew. Because remember I said that he broke from Edward, openly went against him. Edward went into hiding, and his wife, Elizabeth, and their 2 children went, or however many children at that point, I don't know, they kind of just keep popping them all out over the shop in this story. Just so many kids. So with Elizabeth in sanctuary and Edward off who knows where, he was in hiding, Warwick decided that because he didn't get what he wanted with Edward, Edward didn't do what he was told by the kingmaker, Warwick, he decided he would put Henry back on the throne. Yeah, great. So now we've gone from a York king back to a Lancaster king, which, you know, kind of suited Jaquetta Woodville because those witchcraft trials, you know, accusations that she was on, she was really good friends with Margaret of Anjou, who, guess what, is the queen. And nobody on the jury wanted to openly go against the queen because they knew that the queen would refute those charges and that Jaquetta would walk free. So they acquitted her. They could not get her on witchcraft, which obviously made Warwick very angry, as you can imagine. That whole trial found its footing, though, that Warwick presented these 2 little figurines of the king and the queen that Jaquetta had and said that they were, you know, items for use for magical spells and charms and whatever, which obviously is just ridiculous. But back then, people believed it. But again, they didn't want to go against the queen, so they just said, sorry, we don't think she's a witch, so you can go. The case fell apart, though, when Warwick let Edward go. And Edward came back and took the throne back from King Henry because King Henry, he'd lost his mind and he was a frail old man by this time, and there was really no resistance from Henry when Edward came back to take the throne. And once Edward came back and took the throne, the King's Council cleared Jaquetta of any witchcraft accusations, and she went on to live another few years. Did they just not stop? In 1484, Richard III, who is now king after his brother Edward's death, revived those accusations against Jaquetta for witchcraft in an act known as Titulus Regis. He claimed that Jaquetta magicked Edward into loving Elizabeth and marrying her, therefore making their sons illegitimate and not able to take the throne, therefore cementing Richard III as the King of England. However, he didn't have any proof. Jaquetta died when she was 56, and still to this day she is an ancestor of the current reigning monarchs of England through her granddaughter Elizabeth of York, who was mother to King Henry VIII. My cat keeps walking around the table going meow, 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 and it's really annoying. Whilst Jaquetta herself may not have played any big part in the outcome of the War of the Roses, she was still a very poignant figure, especially in the York and Lancaster families. She really did play both sides. She was related to King Henry and she was friends with Margaret of Anjou. She was then mother to Elizabeth, who married the York King Edward, and Edward and Elizabeth's daughter, Elizabeth, married King Henry VII, who then went on to have King Henry VIII as a child. And of course, it was the birth of a dynasty. Today, the monarchs that sit on the English throne are descended in one way or another from Jaquetta of Luxemburg. But she was nonetheless important. The War of the Roses is such a violent time in English history. Lancaster versus York, and then back again, York versus Lancaster, to see who could have the throne. And whilst Jaquetta of Luxemburg may not have been very important as far as deciding the outcomes of these battles, she was still there. She would have been there when Margaret of Anjou was running the country while her husband, Henry VI, was sick and not able to run his own country, and that was a secret kept from everybody. But Jaquetta was there. She would have known because she was a lady in waiting to the Queen and one of the Queen's friends. When her daughter became Queen of England with Edward III, Edward IV. Oh gosh, so many numbers. When her daughter became queen, she was there as one of the highest ranking women in the English court, and she is basically the mother of our current monarchy. So there are many other stories that go with the War of the Roses. Of course, there is Richard Neville's, there is Earl of Warwick, there is the Princes in the Tower, there is Elizabeth of York, there is so many other stories, Richard III, that just can be explored. And I will try to explore those in coming episodes, but I thought I would start with Jaquetta of Luxemburg because she is one of my favourite women in history, and Philippa Gregory is an author who wrote the Tudor court novels and the War of the Roses novels, and she is one of my favourite authors, and I thought I would start off my Who's That in History series with someone from Philippa Gregory's books. So if you're looking to read it, it's called The Lady of the Rivers, and it's by Philippa Gregory. Thank you for hanging out with me today to learn more about Jaquetta of Luxemburg. I really hope that you enjoyed the story. And like I said, while she didn't really have a lot to do with the outcomes of the wars that she was a part of, she was definitely a part of them, and she was there, and she probably knew more than what most other people would have around that time of things that were going on behind closed doors of the monarchy. So it's really interesting to read about these sorts of things. I hope you've had fun, and I will see you next time.